Hello everybody and welcome to So I Play Games. I am your host Scott, and today I want to talk about a game called Edge of Eternity. Edge of Eternity is an open world turn-based action JRPG with a strong emphasis on storytelling. It was developed by Midgar Studio and published by Dear Villagers and Maple Whispering. Edge of Eternity was released on PC in early access back in December of 2018 and had its official release in June of 2021. It was later ported to all consoles in February of 2022. For complete transparency, I did get Edge of Eternity for free from the developers, so thank you Midgar Studio for this opportunity. In Edge of Eternity, you follow two main characters, Darian, a young soldier in the fight against the Acolytes, and his sister Celine, a priestess of the Sanctorium. Together they travel across the vast world of Heron fighting the Acolytes, meeting colorful characters and party members while looking for a cure for the infamous corrosion that has infected their mother. The corrosion, also known as metal sickness, is an affliction that was released by the Acolytes, an alien race who have invaded the world of Heron and have been waging a war of magic and machine for years. The corrosion affects living people and creatures alike, slowly turning them into half organic and half machine abominations that, for the most part, become hostile. The story begins in Here Elsewhere with Darian. You're given a brief introduction of Darian's friends and fellow soldiers, Ordo, Syl, Xandra, and Kino. After a short sparring match with Ordo, Darian receives a letter from his sister Celine. The letter tells of their mother having the corrosion. Adding insult to injury, before Darian is even given a chance to ask if he could visit his mother, their base is attacked. This is when you're introduced to the Acolytes. You're quickly shown just how merciless they are when they almost instantly kill Xandra and Kino. After an emotional battle, the remainder of the group continues fighting their way through the Acolytes, trying to make their way up the mountain to their main headquarters. On the way there, they meet up with a priest who claims he can win the war if they take him with them. This is when there's another brief introduction to the other antagonists of the game. You meet a mysterious human-like figure with a constant silhouette shining over them. Darian and Celine have a short-lived fight with the mysterious person before it disappears, allowing them to continue back up the mountain. Shortly after, you're shown an up-close and personal look at what the corrosion is as it takes over Ordo. Unfortunately, Darian and Celine are forced to kill him before he is completely consumed by it. When the fight with Ordo is over, you continue up the mountain again for one more fight with the mysterious person. After the fight, it's shown that Darian has been injured but can keep pushing forward. Finally, Darian and Celine along with the priest make it to the headquarters. They're met by the mysterious person one last time, but before it can attack, Syl sacrifices herself to close the gate and keep Darian safe. Once inside, Darian sees what the priest really meant by winning the war. This is where the adventure really begins, with Darian as a newfound deserter of the army, searching for his sister and a cure for the corrosion. You take control of Darian a few weeks after the opening act, and right away you get to experience the beautiful open world of Heron. There were more times than I care to count when I would be in awe of how well designed and great every location looked. I found myself running from corner to corner of every new open area, taking in how detailed and impressive it all was. Adding in that there's a weather cycle throughout the game makes for even more eye candy as you continue to explore each area. Even the cities and villages you get to visit are full of people to talk to, multiple shops to interact with, and side quests that give some kind of lore or backstory to the area. Also, while you're exploring each area, you'll find puzzles that reward you with extra items and equipment. The first few that you run into are pretty straightforward, but later on they'll require a little more trial and error to figure out. To help out with getting around a little quicker, you get what I consider the best part of the entire game, the Neckaroos. Long story short, they're oversized, adorable cats. I love its design as a whole, the look, the sound, the animations, everything. You can fast travel with the save stations, but I highly recommend exploring every new area with the Neckaroo, especially since there's an added feature where the Neckaroo can sense hidden items and dig them up for you. A lot of these items are actually useful and can even be better than the weapons and equipment you currently have. If I was to praise one thing I didn't expect, it would have to be the enemy designs. That's not Midgar Studios' fault though. I played too many games where enemies would be recycled to the point of staleness, so it's refreshing when a developer puts actual thought into enemy designs. There are points where you'll see repeat enemies, but there's so much variety of other types of enemies that it doesn't feel like a lazy copy and paste cop-out. The character models are nothing to shy away from either. They aren't anything compared to today's expectations, but that doesn't mean they weren't impressive by any means. You can tell there was a little more time and effort put into the more important characters, and it pays off. They didn't come off as a generic model tossed out just to fill a role. With that being said, it's not perfect. When talking to NPCs for side quests or general story beats, the difference between models was very noticeable. NPCs, unfortunately, are given the short end of the stick and have a less appealing look to them. But to be completely honest, it's nothing game-breaking enough to pull you away from the many other positives this game has to give. When it comes to the combat, equipment, and overall approach toward leveling in Edge of Eternity, there's actually a lot to offer. Equipment and leveling has a familiar feel to most JRPGs. You have your usual armor pieces and weapon for specific characters, and leveling is done through defeating enemies. As for weapons, they level up on their own outside of the character's individual leveling. The twist with the weapons though is that each weapon has a skill tree that you use gems to attach to it. These gems give additional stat boosts and unlock different skills or spells. You won't have full access to the skill tree until you level up the weapon. You can find most of your equipment and weapon through exploring each new area, especially with the Nekaru. If you don't have time for that, you can buy them from shops or craft them through recipes that you can also buy. The crafting system isn't anything complicated either. You can collect ingredients while exploring or buy them from shops. Money is far from being hard to get, so it's not hard to buy everything you need to upgrade your weapons. You can do something similar with the gems too, but you don't need any ingredients, just spare gems you're not using. Upgrading them will change and give more stat boosts while potentially giving access to new skills or spells. Fighting enemies is your run-of-the-mill turn-based combat. You have your ATB or attack time battle that you and your enemies alike have to wait to fill before taking a turn. You have your usual elemental skills, whether it's a spell or a physical attack, along with most enemies having weaknesses to certain ones. Outside of certain bosses, I didn't find there was any special approach other than use their weakness against them. You get ultimate abilities, can defend and move around the battlefield, set yourself up to backstab enemies, and even choose the formation your team will take on the field. The formation of my team would occasionally reset on me, but for the most part, it did work. You're given an auto battle option for easy grinding, but I wouldn't recommend using it unless you're much stronger than what you're fighting. I found myself dying more times than not when letting the auto battle take over. Unfortunately, this feature is less than cooperative. My characters would constantly use attacks that the enemy was strong against, intentionally run into areas the enemy was attacking, use skills that would hurt each other, and run around the field aimlessly, not attacking. Thankfully, Edge of Eternity's other features are more beneficial and add to their unique take on combat. To start off, when attacking with elemental skills, the weather can add or take away from its effectiveness. For example, if it's snowing, ice skills will be more effective, so you have to take into consideration both the enemy's weakness and possible advantages or disadvantages of the weather. On top of that, there are terrain advantages in the form of crystals. These crystals can assist or harm you in your fights. Standing near them can give bonuses to attack, defense, or even heal you. They can also outright attack you at every turn. There's a team energy feature too. Simply put, if you sprint for too long or die too many times in a fight, you'll lose energy. If your energy gets too low, then your characters will be less effective in a fight. Luckily enough, this feature is very forgiving, and all you have to do to refresh your energy is to rest at an inn or a campfire. This can have more than one benefit if you rest at an inn, since you can eat before resting to get a percentage boost to your stats. And finally, at the beginning of every fight, you're given challenges to earn extra items or money once completed. Most of these challenges are easy to achieve. I did run into a few issues though. I had a few fights where I myself or the enemies would stop taking turns and I would be stuck in a standstill, or either the enemy or one of my characters would get stuck in an animation loop, so I would have to hard crash the game. Then there's the early game challenges and the bosses that weren't very difficult, unless I went out of my way. And even then, it didn't change by much. There are some scripted fights that give an extra twist to combat, and I love that they did this, but it only added an interesting take rather than more of a challenge. That being said, I did play on normal, so this could have been solved by choosing a higher difficulty. But aside from that, I did enjoy the combat and overall take on progression for Edge of Eternity. Now, if there's one thing I couldn't shut up about with this game, it would have to be the sound design. Quickly, I'll just say, sounds like the Nekaru purring, weapons clashing, and altogether ambient sounds came off as natural and realistic. Though I do have to say, my favorites out of all of it has to be the soundtrack and the voice acting. I found myself humming along during fights and even hoping the loading screens would take longer so I could hear the whole composition. Even the main music menu pulled me in and was used for the intro before I would start every stream. On top of that, the voice acting was amazing. You can tell that the actors fell into the role rather than just phone it in. Every character had its own personality and every emotional moment felt real. And that's from the very start of the opening act all the way to the final moments of the game. There were a few hiccups though. I had a few moments of sound clipping, and sometimes the volume would go full blast out of nowhere. Some of the dialogue wasn't fully read out, like the first 2 sentences would be said and then they would stop 1 or 2 sentences before finishing what they were saying, or something completely different was said compared to what was on the screen. It didn't happen enough to become a problem, not that it really was one to begin with, but it happened nonetheless. Fortunately, the voice acting and sound design as a whole was so good that it overshadowed these flaws. If you feel like stepping away from the story for a little bit, there are some side quests you can take on. You have the choice of checking out mission boards and towns for hunts. These are simple hunt missions where you're tasked with killing a certain amount of enemies in the area. Pretty straightforward and mainly for easy XP. Your other option is accepting quests from NPCs. These quests vary mattering on where you are, but for the most part are conveniently connected to the lore and main story. I found quite a few quests that I accepted from NPCs, adding to the character building in the game and even explaining some of the lore that was a little vague in the beginning. If anything, some of the NPC missions are a must for understanding what's going on better. Unfortunately, this is all that's available for optional content, but I feel the NPC quests more than make up for the lack of additional content. Overall, I enjoyed Edge of Eternity's gameplay. It had a mix of familiar features with its own unique take on the traditional JRPG genre. With that being said, there were a few performance speed bumps I ran into. Even though there were plenty of them, most of the issues I ran into were pretty easy to laugh off and not game breaking. Simple things like enemies clipping through objects, finding invisible objects to stand on, stuttering, characters not always animating, and enemies and objects popping in and out of existence. That doesn't go for further into the game though. After about halfway through the game, I did start having multiple crash issues. Thankfully, the autosave feature is frequent enough so you never lose more than a couple minutes from where you last were. By the time I finished Edge of Eternity, I had just over 50 hours clocked in. I found myself having a mixed bag of feelings. The best way I can describe it is that I loved the first 80% of the game, but the last 20% fell apart on me. The build up to the end felt rushed, confusing, and lackluster. If I'm to be completely honest, I noticed this in the opening act. It started off like we were trying to build a connection with Darian's friends and introduce the villains, but Darian's friends are removed from the game almost instantly, and there's give or take 3 different villains introduced. I can see what the developers were trying to do, but I don't think there was enough build up to get a proper payoff to feel for Darian's loss. On top of that, bringing in the Arcalites, the corrosion, this godlike character killing people, and a priest sacrificing people on the side was a lot to take in for the first half hour of the game. Thankfully, the brakes do get pumped after this, and there's a gradual attempt at explaining everything throughout the rest of the game. Sadly, the closer I got to the end, the more confusing things got. There were preparations for the final confrontation that were never used, a few moments where it felt the game was trying to have a twist in the story that felt more like backpedaling on previous lore, attempted payoffs with little to no build up, and an unsatisfying to be continued type ending. It hurts me to talk so negatively considering I loved everything in between and leading up to the end. The story was addictive and interesting, the character building was satisfying, the growth with your party members was well paced, the lore of the world was interesting, and the journey throughout the game was thoroughly enjoyable. It just felt that when the end came around there was too much going on, with too many villains, with too many chosen ones, plot points being completely ignored, and previous setups with no payoff. Everything felt like a mad rush to tie everything up in a nice bow, and the end result turned a massively impressive story progression into a scattered mess with more questions than answers. I wish Midgar Studio would have spread out everything that was going on. I mentioned it in my streams a few times that I thought some of the story beats should have been broken down across a couple games, if not more. I honestly believe the ending would have been easier to digest, understand, and feel more satisfying. In the end, aside from what I've mentioned, I had a great time with Edge of Eternity. Despite its many flaws, I still had a lot of fun playing through it and don't regret the time I've invested. With the story aside, a lot of the issues I came across can be fixed, and considering Midgar Studio is still working on the game 4 years down the road, I have no doubt that it will be in time. It's easy to tell that Midgar is very passionate about their game, and considering they're not a large-scale AAA company, it's amazing what they've accomplished so far. Edge of Eternity is an extremely ambitious game, and putting aside all the issues I had, I'd still recommend giving it a try. The fact that they're still adding to and patching it speaks volumes, which is more that can be said for much larger scale AAA companies today. I can honestly say I look forward to their future projects. And there you have it, my opinion on Edge of Eternity. Thank you for watching. If you like this and want to see more, make sure to check out my old reviews from an older channel section. If you want to see more of me, then head over to Twitch where I stream the games we'll be covering here. Link will be in the description. Thanks again, and I hope to see you soon.